Omega accepts Alpha King in a fragile marriage as a forbidden sigil responds to her heartbeat. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Amelia Steele, a woman who had always felt like a shadow in her own world, stood quietly at the edge of the Moonspire Temple. The air around her was heavy with the scent of burning incense and the soft flickering of candlelight. The grand ceremony had already begun, and yet, Amelia had been overlooked. Despite the grace in her posture, despite the strength in her eyes, she was still nothing more than an Omega in a world that valued power above all else. For years, she had hoped for the day when someone would see beyond her Omega status, when someone would see her for what she truly was. But now, as the whispers of her pack filled the temple with murmurs of her disgrace, she realized the dream was nothing more than a distant fantasy. She had no scent. To the wolves who relied on the call of their mate's scent, she might as well have been invisible. And so, there she was, standing alone in the great hall, the last Omega remaining, her heart heavy with the weight of rejection. The ceremony was a turning point, a moment when every Omega's fate was sealed, either claimed or left to fade into the background. But Amelia was left to kneel before the altar, alone, as the others were swiftly taken by alphas and betas alike. "She's broken," they whispered, unwanted. The word stung more than she cared to admit. She had long ago accepted that she was not destined for greatness, not destined for love. The door at the back of the temple creaked open, and a figure stepped into the room, drawing all eyes to him. A tall man, his dark robes flowing behind him, his face hidden beneath a cloak. His presence was commanding, the very air around him shifted as though it knew he was more than just a man. The Alpha King. Elias Thornridge. Amelia had heard stories of him, of his strength, of his cold heart. The whispers of his cruelty were as legendary as his prowess in battle. And yet, there he stood, and his gaze swept across the room, locking onto hers. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. His piercing gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, her heart beating faster as though responding to something inside her. Without a word, Elias made his way toward her, the room falling into a tense silence. "You," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. Amelia's breath caught in her throat, but she refused to look away. She had nothing left to fear. Not anymore. His cold eyes softened slightly, just enough to give her hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she might not be invisible to him. The words he spoke next were not what she expected. "I propose a marriage of convenience. For the good of your pack, for the good of mine." Her heart hammered in her chest as the weight of his words settled over her. A fragile marriage. But it was a lifeline. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something more. As she accepted his offer, something strange began to stir within her, a sensation, a warmth spreading through her chest. She placed her hand over her heart, feeling the pulse of it, stronger than ever before. And then, as their eyes locked, a sigil appeared on her skin, glowing faintly, responding to her heartbeat. What had she just agreed to? What was this connection between them? The future was uncertain, but in that moment, she knew one thing for sure: her life would never be the same again. Amelia stood in the moonlit chamber of the royal castle, the weight of the evening's events still pressing heavily on her shoulders. The marriage was not what she had imagined, but what had she expected? She had been given no choice, no time to prepare. Elias Thornridge, the Alpha King, had spoken of duty and power, and she had agreed. But in her heart, a strange feeling began to bloom. It wasn't fear, nor was it excitement, it was something unfamiliar. A pull, a connection she could not explain. The sigil on her skin still glowed faintly, as though responding to her thoughts, as though answering a call she didn't understand. Her hand drifted instinctively to the mark on her chest, her fingers brushing the warmth of the sigil. It pulsed gently under her touch, a silent rhythm that seemed to echo the steady beat of her heart. She had never felt such a thing before. Was this the bond? The connection that had been whispered about in the stories of the old packs? She had never believed in fate, but now, standing in this grand hall with Elias Thornridge, she couldn't help but wonder. The king had led her to this room with little more than a fleeting glance, and then he had left her to gather her thoughts. Alone. Amelia gazed around the room, the stone walls adorned with tapestries of battles won and lost, the flickering light of the torches casting long shadows across the floor. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the soft rustle of her gown as she moved across the room. Her mind was a whirl of thoughts and emotions, but one thing was certain: she was bound to this man, to this kingdom, by forces she could not comprehend. But what was the true nature of the bond? Was it love, or was it something darker? She looked out the window, her gaze drawn to the distant moon. The moon. The source of all power, the symbol of destiny for their kind. She remembered the words of the ancient texts, of the fated mates, of the deep connection that tied their souls together. Could this be that? Could Elias Thornridge truly be her mate? She was an Omega, weak, overlooked by everyone in her pack, and now she was married to the most powerful man in the kingdom. The thought felt almost unreal. Her fingers traced the sigil again, and this time, a faint warmth spread through her chest, as though the mark were reacting to her doubts. Was she being foolish? Had she truly accepted this bond, this marriage, without understanding what it meant? She had no answers. Only questions. She sighed softly, knowing she would not find the answers tonight. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door creaking open. Elias entered, his presence filling the room. His eyes, cold and distant at first, softened ever so slightly when they landed on her. "You look lost," he said. His voice low and smooth. His words were not unkind, but there was a distance between them, an invisible wall that neither of them had yet broken through. Amelia swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. "I'm just trying to understand what this is," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias stepped closer, his gaze never leaving her. "This is our future, Amelia," he said, his tone firm, yet with an undertone of something deeper. "Our future as rulers of this kingdom." The words hung in the air between them, thick with meaning. She had been prepared for this, prepared for the cold duty, the power, the politics. But as she looked into his eyes, she realized there was more to it than that. He wasn't just a king. He was a man who carried the weight of his kingdom on his shoulders, a man who had faced battles, heartbreak, and loss. And somehow, she was a part of that now. She took a step forward, feeling the pull of their connection deepen. The sigil on her chest responded, its warmth growing stronger. The king was her mate, whether she was ready for it or not. Elias's gaze softened, and for the briefest moment, Amelia saw something vulnerable in his eyes. A flicker of uncertainty, hidden beneath the surface of the king's stoic exterior. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar hardness of the ruler. "We have much to do, Amelia," he said, breaking the silence. "But for now, we have time." She nodded, her heart still racing. Time. Time to understand the bond, to understand him. Time to learn what it meant to be his mate. And as the room grew quiet once more, Amelia realized that her journey was only just beginning. Amelia awoke the next morning with the soft light of dawn filtering through the heavy curtains of her new chambers. The unfamiliar softness of the bed, the silence of the room, and the absence of the bustling sounds she was used to in her old home felt like a dream. She lay still for a moment, the events of the previous night rushing back to her. The marriage. The sigil. Elias. Her heart fluttered with uncertainty. She wasn't sure what she was feeling. The pull of the bond was undeniable, but the path ahead seemed so unclear. She had agreed to this marriage to save her pack, yet she couldn't ignore the growing sense that there was more to this connection than just duty. Elias had offered her a fragile marriage, one built on necessity, but as she lay there, she began to wonder if it could be something more. Could she really find peace in this marriage? Could they truly build something real, or would they always be bound by the weight of their roles? She pushed herself out of bed and walked to the window. The kingdom stretched out before her, bathed in the pale morning light. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and fresh earth. It was beautiful. But she had not come here for beauty. She had come here to save her people, and she couldn't forget that. As she turned away from the window, a soft knock echoed at the door. Amelia's heart skipped a beat, and she took a deep breath before answering. "Enter," she called, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. The door opened, and Elias stepped into the room. He was dressed in the same dark attire from the night before, his presence as commanding as ever. His gray eyes met hers, and for a moment, the room seemed to grow still. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm, yet there was something in the way he looked at her that made her pulse quicken. "I trust you slept well." Amelia nodded, unsure of how to respond. "Yes, thank you. The room is comfortable." Elias stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I trust you will find it to your liking. We must prepare for the day ahead. There are matters of state to attend to, but I thought you might appreciate a moment to gather your thoughts first." Amelia stood frozen for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. She had never been one for politics, never been one to command a room like he did. But now, she was in his world, and she had no choice but to step forward with him. "Of course," she said softly. "I will be ready soon." Elias nodded and turned to leave, but then paused at the door. "Amelia," he said, his voice low, "I understand this is difficult. But know that you are not alone in this. We will face it together." His words were not what she had expected. There was sincerity in his tone, something that felt genuine. It was the first time she had seen this side of him, the side that was not just the king, but a man who seemed to understand the weight of their shared destiny. Amelia's heart softened ever so slightly, and she gave him a small nod. "Thank you, Elias," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. He held her gaze for a moment longer before leaving the room, the door clicking softly behind him. Amelia was left standing alone once more, but this time, she felt the weight of the bond between them, the sigil on her chest still faintly glowing. She had agreed to this marriage to save her pack, but perhaps there was something more to it, something that went beyond duty and obligation. Perhaps, in time, she would come to understand what that was. For now, all she could do was take it one step at a time. Amelia stood in the grand hall of the palace, the weight of her new life settling heavily upon her shoulders. The castle, with its towering stone walls and grand tapestries depicting the kingdom's history, felt cold and unfamiliar. She had spent the night in her chambers, trying to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she was haunted by the sigil that still glowed faintly on her chest. She could feel it, pulsing softly with her heartbeat, as if it was alive, as if it was waiting for something. The connection between her and Elias was undeniable, but it was still new, still uncertain. Was it a bond of fate, or was it just a product of their circumstances? The marriage had been arranged out of necessity, to save her pack, and yet, there was something else, something that pulled her towards him. She couldn't deny it, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to. Elias was not the cold, distant king she had expected. He had been kind to her, at least in his own way, and she had begun to wonder if there was more to him than just the weight of the crown. She walked down the long corridor, the sound of her footsteps echoing off the stone floors. As she passed a series of windows, she caught sight of the sprawling gardens outside. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a golden glow across the courtyard. It was beautiful. But Amelia knew she couldn't afford to lose herself in the beauty of the palace. There was a kingdom to run, a pack to protect, and she had a role to play in all of it. She had agreed to this marriage, and now it was time to step into the life she had chosen, or rather, the life that had been chosen for her. As she reached the grand doors leading to the throne room, she paused, taking a deep breath. She had been here for days, yet it still felt like a dream. A dream she didn't know how to wake up from. The doors opened before her, and Elias stepped into view. He was dressed in the royal attire she had seen him wear the night before, the dark fabric of his cloak flowing around him like liquid shadow. His presence was commanding, as always, and for a moment, Amelia felt that familiar pull. She couldn't explain it, but every time she was near him, her heart raced. "Amelia," Elias said, his voice low and steady. "It's time." She nodded, though she wasn't sure what he meant. He stepped aside, and she followed him into the room. The throne room was filled with nobles, advisors, and warriors, all standing at attention as the king entered. Elias took his seat on the throne, the golden crown resting atop his head. It was a symbol of his power, his authority. But as he looked at her, Amelia saw something else in his eyes. It wasn't just the gaze of a ruler. There was something more, something that made her heart beat faster. "Amelia," Elias said again, his voice carrying through the room. "This is our kingdom. And together, we will lead it." His words were not just a command. There was a promise in them, a promise that she would be by his side, not just as his wife, but as his partner. The bond between them, the sigil on her chest, seemed to hum with agreement. Amelia looked out over the room, at the faces of the people who would now be her subjects. She wasn't sure she was ready for this, but she had no choice. The marriage had been arranged, and now, there was no turning back. As Elias looked at her, she realized that this was her life now. This was her future. And in that moment, she made a decision. She would embrace it, whatever it meant. She would be the mate of the Alpha King, and together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. Amelia stood by the large, arched windows of the royal castle, watching as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson. It had been several days since the ceremony, and still, the weight of her new life felt like a constant presence, a quiet force pressing on her chest. She had learned little about Elias, despite their shared nights and brief conversations. The sigil on her skin continued to pulse faintly, almost as if it were responding to the growing tension between them. She had expected distance. She had expected coldness. After all, this was a marriage of necessity, not love. But she hadn't expected the loneliness that came with it. The king had been busy with his duties, the weight of ruling a kingdom leaving little room for anything else. He was always surrounded by advisors and warriors, his days consumed by matters of state. Amelia, on the other hand, found herself lost in the vastness of the castle. Her chambers felt empty despite the lavish furnishings and the warm fire that crackled in the hearth. She was now the queen, but she had no idea how to navigate this new world. The distance between her and Elias had only grown since their marriage. He was kind, in his own way, but there were walls around him that she couldn't penetrate. She had tried to ask him about the bond, the sigil that connected them, but he had only brushed it aside with vague answers, never truly explaining what it meant or why it existed. Amelia sighed softly, her hand resting against the cool stone of the window frame. She had made a promise to herself to be strong, to stand by his side and help lead the kingdom. But the uncertainty of their future together was gnawing at her. Could she truly embrace this bond? Could she learn to love him? The sound of footsteps behind her interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see Elias standing in the doorway. His dark eyes met hers, and for the first time in days, she saw something softer in them, something that wasn't masked by the burden of the crown. "Amelia," he said, his voice low, "I have some time. Would you walk with me?" Amelia hesitated for a moment before nodding. She had always known he had his reasons for keeping his distance, but perhaps this was her chance to understand him better, to see beyond the king. "Of course," she replied, and with that, they both turned and walked down the long corridors of the castle. The air outside was cool, the night sky filled with stars. The gardens stretched out before them, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. Elias led her to a secluded corner of the garden, where a fountain trickled softly in the background. He stopped and turned to face her. "I know this hasn't been easy for you," he began, his tone more open than it had been before. "And I know I've been distant." Amelia looked up at him, unsure of what to say. She had expected him to say more, but instead, there was a silence between them. He seemed to struggle for the right words, as if unsure how to break the wall between them. "I never wanted this marriage to be just about duty," he continued, his voice low but steady. "But I also know that I cannot offer you the life you may have dreamed of." His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Amelia swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his confession. "I didn't expect a dream, Elias," she said softly. "I only wanted a chance to make a difference." Elias's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, she saw the man behind the king. The man who carried the burden of leadership with no one to truly share it with. He stepped closer, the warmth of his presence wrapping around her like a shield. "And you will, Amelia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Together, we will make a difference." Amelia felt a flicker of hope deep within her. She had feared that this marriage would be a prison, that the bond would be nothing more than a reminder of her obligations. But in that moment, as she looked into Elias's eyes, she saw something more, a partnership, a possibility. The sigil on her chest pulsed once more, and she knew that whatever lay ahead, she would face it with him by her side. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could learn to love him, not just as the king, but as the man he was beneath it all. Amelia walked through the grand halls of the castle the next day, her thoughts still lingering on the conversation she had with Elias the night before. There was a shift, something subtle but significant, that made her feel a little more certain about her place here. The garden walk had shown her a side of Elias she had not expected, vulnerable, uncertain, yet genuine in his desire to build something meaningful. She hadn't known what to expect from her life as queen. At first, she thought it would be nothing more than an elaborate facade, a union built solely for political survival. But now, with each passing day, she began to see the small cracks in that facade. Elias had a burden, a weight that no one truly saw, and yet he carried it with such grace that Amelia could only admire him more. She found herself caught between two worlds, the world of a queen, with its responsibilities and power, and the world of a woman, uncertain of her role in her heart. She had not expected to care for Elias this quickly. In the past, she had seen kings as figures of authority, distant and cold. But Elias was different. He was a ruler, yes, but he was also a man who bore the same struggles as any other. As the days passed, Amelia threw herself into her new duties, attending meetings, advising Elias when needed, and learning more about the kingdom she was now a part of. But no matter how busy she became, her thoughts always returned to him. One evening, as she sat in her chambers, a soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, her voice steady. The door creaked open, and Elias stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "Not at all," Amelia replied, standing up from her desk. "What brings you here?" Elias paused for a moment, as though considering his words carefully. "I wanted to speak with you," he said. "About us." Amelia's heart skipped a beat at the words. She hadn't expected him to bring up the bond again, not after their brief conversation in the garden. "What about us?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Elias walked closer, his eyes searching hers as if trying to find the right words. "Amelia, I know we've had little time to get to know each other. And I know that this marriage, this bond, is new to both of us." He paused, taking a breath before continuing. "But I want you to know that I'm willing to try. Not just as your king, but as your husband. I don't want us to be strangers in this marriage. I want us to build something real. Together." Amelia's chest tightened as she heard the sincerity in his words. For so long, she had seen their union as nothing more than a necessity, a duty. But Elias's words made her wonder if there was something more, something she had yet to fully grasp. She took a step closer to him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I want that too," she said softly. "But I don't know where to begin." Elias smiled gently, his hand reaching out to touch her arm. "We begin with trust. And patience. And time. We don't have to figure it all out right away." Amelia nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. There was still so much uncertainty, but for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. Elias wasn't just her king. He was offering her a partnership, a chance to build something together, no matter how fragile it might seem. The sigil on her chest pulsed again, stronger now, as if it were reacting to the change in their dynamic. It was a bond, not just of necessity, but of something deeper, something that Amelia was beginning to understand. And for the first time since their marriage, she felt a glimmer of something beyond duty. She felt the beginning of a connection. Elias's hand lingered on her arm for a moment before he stepped back, his eyes meeting hers. "We will figure this out, Amelia," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "Together." Amelia looked up at him, her heart full of a mixture of hope and uncertainty. But in that moment, she knew one thing for sure: whatever lay ahead, she would face it with him by her side. Amelia sat at the large wooden desk in her chambers, papers scattered around her as she tried to organize the reports from various members of the court. The castle was alive with activity, and yet, she couldn't shake the feeling of isolation that seemed to follow her no matter where she went. She had grown accustomed to the quiet, to the stillness of her own thoughts, but now, there was an undeniable change in the air. The bond, the sigil, and the promise Elias had made to her had left her questioning everything. She had agreed to this marriage out of duty, out of necessity, but now she wondered if there was more to it. Elias had been kind to her, offering his partnership in a way she hadn't expected. Still, the distance between them remained, a thin but constant thread that neither of them had yet to cross. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts, and she looked up to see one of the royal guards standing in the doorway. "Your Majesty, the Alpha King requests your presence in the throne room," he said, his tone respectful but firm. Amelia's heart fluttered at the mention of Elias. She had been busy with her duties, but this was the first time in a while that he had asked for her specifically. She set down the papers and stood, smoothing out her dress as she made her way to the door. The walk to the throne room felt longer than usual, her thoughts racing with anticipation and uncertainty. When she finally arrived, the heavy doors opened to reveal Elias standing by the large, ornate throne. He looked every bit the king, commanding, powerful, and yet, there was a flicker of something else in his eyes when they met hers. "Amelia," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Come. There is something I wish to discuss." Amelia nodded and stepped forward, the silence between them almost palpable. She had been expecting something formal, a conversation about the kingdom, about their duties. But there was a shift in the air, something more personal, something she couldn't quite place. Elias motioned for her to sit beside him, and she did, the weight of the moment not lost on her. For the first time, she truly felt like his partner, not just his queen. "I know things have been difficult," Elias began, his voice softer than it had ever been. "And I know I've kept my distance." Amelia looked at him, her gaze searching his face for any hint of what he was truly feeling. "I understand," she said. Her voice steady, though her heart raced. "We both have our duties. I've had much to learn in a short amount of time." Elias nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's true," he said, "but there's more I need to say." Amelia's breath caught in her chest. What was he about to say? "I never wanted this marriage to be just a political move," he continued, his tone low, almost vulnerable. "But I also never expected the bond between us to feel so real. I can feel it, Amelia. This sigil, this connection, it's more than just a mark on our skin." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She had felt it too, the pulse of the sigil, the way it responded to her every emotion. It was as if their hearts were linked in some unspoken way. She hadn't known how to process it, but now, hearing him speak of it, she felt a sense of relief. "I didn't expect it either," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I feel it too." Elias looked at her, his gaze intense. "Then let's take the next step, together. Let's make this marriage more than just duty. Let's make it a partnership." Amelia felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It was as if all the doubts, all the uncertainty, were beginning to fade away. For the first time since their marriage, she felt truly seen by Elias. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced with the weight of his words. "I want that too." Elias smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. For the first time, she saw not just the king, but the man behind the crown. "Then we will begin, Amelia. We will face everything together." In that moment, Amelia knew that their journey was just beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with Elias by her side, and for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope for their future. Amelia stood by the window of the palace, the cool breeze gently brushing against her face as she gazed out at the vast gardens below. The castle was alive with the preparations for an upcoming royal gathering, and yet, her thoughts remained far from the busy activity of the court. Her mind kept returning to the conversation she had with Elias in the throne room. It had been a turning point for her, one that left her with more questions than answers. The sigil on her chest had begun to feel like a constant companion, pulsing softly in response to her every thought, every emotion. She had felt its pull from the moment she had agreed to this marriage, but now, with Elias's words echoing in her mind, it felt different. He had promised a partnership, a future built on trust and mutual understanding. And for the first time, Amelia believed him. The bond between them, once a distant, intangible force, was now something she could feel with every breath she took. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but in that moment, she knew she was ready to walk alongside him, to face whatever came their way together. The days that followed were filled with more moments of quiet connection between her and Elias. They spent time in the royal library, poring over ancient texts and discussing the future of the kingdom. Their conversations were no longer just about politics or royal duties. They began to talk about their hopes, their dreams, and the things that scared them. Elias spoke little of his past, but Amelia began to understand the weight he carried as king. He had known loss, sacrifice, and the burden of leadership long before they had met. But in his eyes, she saw a flicker of something more, something he had only recently allowed himself to acknowledge, the possibility of something beyond duty. Amelia, too, had her own fears. She feared that the bond they shared might be a fleeting thing, something that would fade with time. She feared that she would never truly belong in this world of power and influence. But every time Elias looked at her, his eyes soft with understanding, she felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. It was as though the sigil on her chest was guiding her, helping her find her place in this strange new world. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Elias invited her to walk with him in the gardens. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft glow over the sprawling grounds. As they walked in silence, the sounds of the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the rhythm of their footsteps. Elias glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Amelia," he began, his voice gentle. "I know we have a long way to go. But I need you to know that I believe in us." Amelia turned to look at him, her heart skipping a beat at the sincerity in his words. "I believe in us too," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart raced with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Elias reached out, taking her hand in his. The warmth of his touch sent a ripple of warmth through her, and for a moment, she forgot about everything else, the politics, the expectations, the doubts. In that moment, it was just the two of them, standing beneath the stars, united by a bond that neither of them fully understood but both were willing to embrace. "We don't have to have all the answers right now," Elias said, his thumb brushing gently over her hand. "But we'll figure it out together." Amelia nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She didn't have all the answers, and neither did Elias, but together, they could face whatever the future held. And for the first time since their marriage, Amelia felt a sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't alone in this. The bond, the sigil, the marriage, they were all part of a journey they would take together. She had no idea what the future would bring, but in that moment, standing beside Elias in the moonlit garden, she knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Amelia walked through the palace corridors, her thoughts still swirling from the conversation she had shared with Elias the night before. It had been a rare moment of vulnerability between them, one that she hadn't expected, but welcomed. His promise to face the future together had given her a sense of comfort she hadn't known she needed. It was strange, this connection they shared, and yet, it felt real, tangible, as if it were something neither of them could ignore. She had always been a woman who valued duty, but now, standing beside Elias, she began to understand that duty could coexist with something deeper, something more personal. It was in the way he had looked at her, the gentleness in his touch, the way his words had been laced with a sincerity she had never expected from a king. It was in the sigil that now pulsed softly against her chest, responding to her heartbeat, as if it too recognized the shift between them. Amelia knew there was still much to learn, much to understand, but in that moment, the uncertainty that had clouded her heart for so long began to clear. She was no longer just a queen by title, she was his partner, his mate. The thought stirred something inside her, an unfamiliar warmth, a sense of belonging that she had never known before. As the days passed, Amelia and Elias continued to work together, their partnership growing stronger. They made decisions for the kingdom, navigated the complexities of court life, and slowly but surely, built a foundation for their future. There were still moments of distance, moments where their roles as king and queen seemed to pull them apart, but each time they came together, the bond between them deepened. One evening, after a particularly long day of discussions and meetings, Elias invited Amelia to the royal gardens once again. It had become a quiet tradition, one that they had both come to look forward to. As they walked through the moonlit paths, surrounded by the scents of blooming flowers, Elias spoke to her in a way that was both familiar and new. "Amelia," he said, his voice soft, "I know this has been a lot for you. The expectations, the responsibilities. It's not what you signed up for, and I understand if you feel overwhelmed." Amelia stopped and turned to face him, her gaze steady. "I did not sign up for this marriage because I thought it would be easy," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I signed up because I believe in us, in this kingdom, and in the future we can build together." Elias looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before a small, genuine smile appeared on his lips. "I don't say it enough," he said quietly, "but I'm grateful for you. For everything you've done, for everything you're willing to give." Amelia's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had always known that Elias was a man of few words, a king who carried the weight of his title with quiet strength, but hearing him speak like this, so openly, so sincerely, it meant more to her than she could express. "We're in this together," she replied, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "Whatever comes, we will face it side by side." Elias's eyes softened as he reached out to take her hand. The warmth of his touch, the steady strength of his grasp, reminded her of the promise they had made to each other, to face the future together, no matter what it held. The sigil on her chest seemed to pulse in response, as if it too understood the depth of the bond they were forging. It was no longer just a symbol of duty, it had become a symbol of something more. Something that Amelia could now feel in her heart. Together, Elias repeated, his voice low and full of conviction. And as they stood there, hand in hand beneath the stars, Amelia felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. This marriage, this bond, was no longer just a duty, it was the beginning of something real. Something that, with each passing day, felt more and more like home.